So we will send out this recording in a follow-up email as well. So welcome, ESL teachers, ready, set, plan. I'm Mary and this is Tyler. And we are both former ESL teachers. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but we really wanted to bring people together today and get a conversation started about preparing for the school year. So the things that we're going to cover are preparing for your first week, the language focus, and then curriculum ready. And at the end, we're going to talk a bit about a bonus that we're going to send you just for coming to see us tonight. So one of the favorite quotes that pops to mind when I think about this planning, and we're in the middle of summer, but we really get to get going on planning, is Leonard Bernstein's, who says, to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time, which I think is that feeling for me once August hits and it feels like Sunday night every night, and that anxiety of getting ready. And this image comes to mind, right? We're really excited at the beginning of the school year to start. And then it used to be teachers in June, but I made it say teachers in mid-September, because honestly, this is how I felt about mid-September. I was disheveled, right? Thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I would have, I wish I would have, I wish I would have. And thinking all of these, seeing all these things that the district was throwing at me, and I'm still trying to do my planning. So our plan here today is to get you to think about what you can do ahead of time to start getting ready. So I'm Mary D. Simone, and I own Mountaintop Education Consulting. I was an ESL teacher, an instructional coach, and an administrator for about 20 years. And now I do coaching for ESL teachers and mainstream teachers who have ESL, and we do PD, and I do some international work. This is really the part of the administrative job that I loved, was working with teachers. So I wanted to be able to get into that and really support teachers with this. And Tyler, I think you have a similar background you'll share, right?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Ramey, and I am the owner of ESL Education Consulting. And I do have a very similar background to Mary. I have also been in the field around 20 years as an ESL teacher, instructional coach, and district administrator. I also teach some adjunct courses at a local university. And same thing, I really enjoy the work of supporting teachers, whether they're ESL teachers or gen ed mainstream classroom teachers, to help them with what best practice looks like for working with multilingual learners, because it can be a tricky thing. Even if you have training in it, it can be really tricky. So working as a coach, providing professional development, all of the same kind of things that Mary mentioned, that's what I'm doing now. So why is this work important? As Mary mentioned, when August hits, you seem to start getting that feeling in your stomach, maybe having some dreams about going back to school. Maybe it doesn't feel as relaxing as you might like it to be when we sometimes have the best weather of the summer during the last couple weeks of August. And we don't always get to enjoy that time because we're thinking about, what do I have to do to get myself ready? Typically, what always happened to me was towards the end of the school year, maybe in the spring, I had all these amazing plans about what I was going to do to start the year off. So organized, so well planned, with just these great ideas. And then I was so exhausted by the time the end of the year came that I just wanted to enjoy my summer. And I thought, well, once school comes and I have that one day, maybe half a day before the kids come and we're getting paid to be at school, maybe I'll do the work then. So we really wanted to have this conversation and start people thinking about, what can I do to start getting myself prepared to get into this work and not have that stress and anxiety lingering through the rest of the summer. So we already kind of mentioned what your roles may be. We have some people that might be in a self-contained classroom where it's just ESL students, In the high school, they wouldn't refer to it as a self-contained, it might just be an ESL classroom, right? We have teachers who work as co-teachers. We have ESL teachers who are in a push-in model, as well as a pull-out model, and then quite a few people who might be in some kind of hybrid role where maybe they're pushing in part of the day and they're pulling their newcomers out, or they're co-teaching during math, but they're pushing in or pulling out during ELA. There's a lot of possible roles that you could have. And so why are we talking about this? We want to think about what that means in terms of conversations that you want to start thinking about and planning with other stakeholders here. So the other teachers that you're going to be working with, whether it's another grade level, your co-teacher, the SPED teacher, or your administrators. Maybe you really want to talk about what are the responsibilities and expectations for me in this role. Sometimes it needs a little bit of clarification in terms of what your role and responsibilities are really supposed to look like. We can move to the next slide. So in Massachusetts, we have some guidance from the state about what it is supposed to look like. Now, if you're not in Massachusetts, you may have something that is similar to this. All students that are identified as English learners must have access to the curriculum, and they also must receive ESL instruction. So the ESL instruction is the direct explicit language development support, right? So in Massachusetts and in some other states, general ed teachers are required to have either a sheltered English instruction endorsement or maybe a SIOP endorsement, some kind of endorsement that says you have had a specific number of hours to prepare you to work with English language learners and support their language development. Well, that's important because you as the ESL teacher are not the only person responsible for the language development of your students. But it's also important to know that your role is not just an extra dose of ELA. It's not just an extra dose of math. So sometimes those conversations can be a little bit uncomfortable if you're working with a teacher who may not really understand exactly what your role is. So just planning out now what that conversation could sound like, what are the points that you really want to make sure that everyone understands, that could help to ease you in before the school year starts, so that you're not having to have those uncomfortable conversations when you're pushing into a 4th grade ELA teacher's classroom and they're saying, here, I want you to do this with that group, right? Like, no. So what is ESL not supposed to be? Here's a list for you, right? I mentioned a couple. It's not academic support. It's not special ed, although you most certainly can have students who are dually identified. Absolutely, we have a lot of them. It's not an intervention. You're not an extra helper. You're not just homework help. You're not a tutor. And you're not just taking the core curriculum and guiding the students through it. That's not the expectation here of what ESL is. So again, if you are working with someone, think about who the teachers are in your building. Are those new teachers who do not understand what is supposed to happen with ESL? Have they maybe been around for a really long time and have a different view of what ESL is supposed to be? So getting those thoughts going in your mind and planning out those conversations can help set you up for that. So when we're thinking about getting started, whether it's in your classroom or in any of the other classrooms where you're going to work, what routines do you need to have in place for your students? If you're going into another classroom, what are those routines that you want to establish collaboratively with the other teachers and with your students? So for example, if you're co-teaching with another teacher, it's probably important that you're both using the same call to attention, right? It's probably important that you're using the same symbol for needing the bathroom, having the same expectations for when I want to share, right? Because when you don't have the same expectations working with another teacher, that's when things can get a little bit messy and confusing for both the teachers and the students. If you have a classroom of your own, what are the routines during those transition times during the day, right? You have so many components, so many pieces of the day that we need to think about, what can I put in place for my kids so they don't have to think about this every day? When this time of the day happens, they just know this is what's expected, this is what I'm going to do. I've been in a lot of different teachers' classrooms where they just ran themselves. You really didn't even need to have the teacher there because their routines had been so well taught and modeled that every single different component of the day, the kids knew exactly what to do at that time. And that makes your life so much easier. But also it makes the lives of the students easier, especially if they're a beginning level proficient, a lower proficiency level, a beginner speaker, because they don't have to use all of that cognitive power to figure out what they're supposed to be doing at that time of day, right? So here we just have some examples of different times of the day that might need some different routines. This is for beginning of the day, end of the day. And on our next slide here, we have some throughout the day routines and academic routines. Now you might be looking at this list thinking like, whoa, guys, that's a lot, right? And yeah, absolutely, it is. But if you really think about what you're already doing in your classroom, you might have this many routines already going. But we just want to make sure we're mentioning this because we know that having these things in place are going to set you up for success for all of the reasons that I listed before. It just becomes natural. The kids don't have to think about it. It's a lot more, a lot less disorganized within the classroom. So it will help your students. It will help you whenever you have a substitute coming in, if they do have substitutes for ESL teachers, because some places do not, unless you're in maybe like a self-contained newcomer classroom or something like that, or at the high school level, then they do get subs for you. But we just need to make sure that that's, you know, already in place so that they don't have to think about it.
And I'd say too, Tyler, that these are things that all good classrooms are going to have, whether they're ESL classrooms or not. So really,
Absolutely.
like you said, thinking of the visuals for it, but being prepared if you have someone come in who is a non-English speaker completely, right? Like, how are you going to show this? And what are the primary ones that you want to focus on? So like you said, just getting that in mind to start to build with your students is going to be great. The next piece we want to think about is building community. Again, something every classroom needs to do, but how are we going to think about that for our ESL students and an ESL community? So first, like all students, we want them to feel seen, safe, included. And for our Ls, there's this extra component of feeling the linguistically and culturally inclusiveness of the classroom. So what are you going to consider as you're welcoming them into your classroom? How are you going to recognize their cultures? How are you going to learn about them and have them, students, learn about each other as well? Lowering the affective filter for ESL students who, and shy students in general, but ESL students who just don't want to speak in class because they're a little too nervous. They're not sure of their English, but they have the correct answers. There's some really interesting brain research on creating these culturally inclusive classrooms and being able to lower the affective filter, where if students are feeling stressed or threatened, the brain stem is just like your on-off switch, right? And they just shut down and they can't take in any more information. So spending time on building community and making your students feel welcome in the classroom is going to benefit them and you as you go along, and continuing to build the community throughout the year. A few things to highlight for our ESL students are recognizing their culture. And in one of the elementary classrooms I used to teach, we would have the kids draw their flag from their country and we'd have their picture on it, and those would go up around the classroom just so they would recognize who else was from their country, or how many countries were represented in our classroom. We always spend time on names, both the correct pronunciation, which is hugely important, spending time on that, as well as making sure everybody knows everybody else's names. There was a few years back in my classroom where I had pull-out students from different classrooms come in to see me, and I realized in about October that they still didn't know each other's names. And I hadn't spent enough time on it at the beginning of the year, and I certainly didn't focus on it as I was going through the next few weeks. So lesson learned. Focusing on names is going to be a really important piece of that. And then just starting to know their interests like you would for students in another classroom. But how are you going to do that with the language diversity in there? How are you going to accept their answers back? So thinking that through as you get ready is going to be huge. And then pre-assessments. So WIDA in Massachusetts, we take that in January, February, and get the scores back in about May, June. So by the time we see them in September, it's not really valid, right? So we want to do some pre-assessment as our students are coming in, and we want to know before we arrive in the classroom what we're assessing and how we're going to assess it. So you want to think through the 4 domains: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And then you want to think through the 3 dimensions, right? The words, the sentence and grammar level, and then the discourse level. And a great way to capture some of the information as you're doing these assessments is through the old can-do name charts from 2016 from WIDA. Can you throw those in the chat?
I just did.
Tyler, thank you. So they're a great way just to start looking at what students should be able to do at each level and where they are and how you can help them, and to keep it all in one place. So some of the things you want to do are for a writing sample, for example. Let's see what's happening with the ELA teacher. You don't necessarily have to do your own writing sample in your class, but be sure to collaborate with the other teachers at your grade level to get those as well. You want to spend some time getting an oral sample. You might use something like Flipgrid and have some stations in your classroom, and be sure you have different levels of questions. So if they're just a beginner, they can answer something orally, or if they're more advanced, they can do that as well. Get your students used to you walking around with a clipboard or an iPad, because pre-assessments, any assessments really, they don't have to be super structured. They can just be and should be part of your everyday. So as students are talking in small groups, you walk around with your clipboard and you check their oral comprehension, you check their oral output, and you can make notes then. I think one of the fears that I've come across with many teachers is, well, how much time am I spending on building these routines and doing pre-assessment? And administrators want me to get right into the content. And I can say as an administrator, and I think Tyler will back me up, that if you jump right into the content without doing all of this, that's just going to be a lot harder for you. As an administrator, I always appreciated taking the time to really work through this for the first week and then blend it in through the following weeks so this can get done. So just think through, what type of activities could you be doing the first week or 2 that could also be used as an assessment? In what other teachers might you be collaborating with that would have students doing work in their classrooms that you could take as assessments as well?
And I just want to add to really quickly, Mary, that sometimes if we don't take some kind of pre-assessment data, then by the time we get to the middle of the year and the end of the year, we forget what our students were doing in the beginning of the year. So having that data from the beginning of the school year is really going to help you remember what kind of growth is happening, because I've kicked myself a couple of times in the past where I didn't take that data, and then I couldn't remember around February, trying to think back, like, has EVO really made this much progress, or am I remembering that wrong? So when you have that data, it's great for you. It's also great for them, because sometimes they need to have that encouragement too, to remind them, you've come this far, even though you might not feel like it.
Mhm.
So now we're going into language focus, and we're going to briefly talk about social language, intentional interactions, and language functions. So when we're talking social language is the language of the playground, right? It's the language of talking with friends. It's our non-academic language. So why would I be mentioning social language? Depending on the students that you have in your classroom, these might be things that need to be taught, right? So if you have, especially if you have newcomers, they're going to need to see language modeled and how it should be used. And going back to talking about setting those routines in your classroom, these two things can kind of go hand in hand. If we are passing food out for snack, if we're getting in the lunch line, if we're talking to students in the hallway asking questions, that kind of social language might need to be very explicitly modeled and taught to students who otherwise might not know it. So what kinds of things, what is that survival English that your beginners might need to know, right? And it's not necessarily anything academic at the moment, but it's something that they need to be able to get through every part of their day. Is there language that they might need to practice using for getting on or off the bus, for asking questions in the cafeteria, thinking about going back to that list of routines and identifying which parts might need some support? We also want to consider how we're getting our students to interact with each other. Turn and talk should always, that's something that we should see in everybody's classroom, but absolutely giving the student, any ESL students, the opportunities to be practicing the language that you're supporting them with during the classroom. When students have the opportunity to practice in a less intimidating manner, they'll be more likely to take a risk and maybe share out in a larger group afterwards. If you ever notice, if you're teaching a whole group, you're asking a question and nobody's offering up an answer, watch what happens if you say, turn and talk to your partner first, and then I'm going to call on 2 people, and see what happens. It's amazing. I have videos of this happening in my classroom. Nobody ask a question and it's crickets. And then all of a sudden I'll say, turn to your partner, and then the entire room erupts. So it's not necessarily that they don't know, they just might feel a little uncomfortable. So thinking about how you want to plan those intentional interactions with your students to be able to use the language, whether it's a whole group situation, small group, is it happening in your pull-out ESL classroom? Is it happening when you're pushing into the classroom? What are the proficiency levels? Am I intentionally putting students who are the same language together? Am I intentionally not putting the same language together? Do I want a higher level student with a lower, so they're a model? There's so many different considerations, but those are the things that you want to think about, so you're getting your students to wherever you need them to be and have that comfort level of using that language, right? So the next piece, language functions and forms. This is kind of my biggest, like, nerding out thing. I am I love language functions and forms, and it sounds so boring, but I can talk about it forever. And the reason is because it makes such a huge difference with your kids when you identify the needed language functions and you teach them explicitly. Once the kids know how to do those things, they can do them anywhere, whether it's math, social studies, ELA, even music. If they know how to list something, if they know the language that they need in order to restate or retell, that's going to make a huge difference for them in all other areas of their day, of their schooling, right? So if you're thinking about the beginning of school, the first week, the first couple weeks, what kinds of activities, whether they're academic or not as academic, what are the functions of language that your kids are going to need to use, and how are you going to support them with that, right? So for example, are we going to ask students during our morning meeting to tell us what you did over the weekend or over the summer? Well, if I'm thinking about what my students need to do that, they need to know what kind of language to use when retelling. Are they using sequencing, first, next, then? But please only use first, next, then in the beginning of the school year. They've got to have more sophisticated language than that at another point of the year, beginning, middle, and whatever. And do they need to know how to use past tense? Right? I'm not going to ask my students to tell me what they did yesterday or over the summer if I haven't supported them and told them, here are some words that you might want to use, especially if they're beginners. So just looking at the list, thinking about what am I going to be expecting of my kids in the beginning of the year, and how am I going to support them? There's always functions that are like I call them your bang for your buck functions. And you can go ahead. Okay. And you can see in the charts here that they're basically the three that I was going to mention. There's comparing and contrasting, same and different. There's summarizing or sequencing, and then always describing or explaining. Those, in my opinion, are the three biggest bang for your buck functions, because those things happen all the time, right? They always have to explain the order of how something happens. They're constantly having to compare how things are the same and different. So supporting them with anchor charts around the classroom. Maybe you have printed out sentence frames for them in a smaller notebook or a smaller folder, depending on what your situation is. If you're pushing into a classroom, it's kind of hard to have your own things on a wall if you're going into multiple classrooms, right? But you can always kind of make yourself a mobile flip chart or using things electronically.
All right. So just backing up with the anchor charts, we're going to talk about that too a bit as we get into curriculum, but just thinking through now, what do you want up at the beginning of the year, right? We don't want everything up, but we want to put up what we're going to be starting with, so we're not overwhelming, but we're building it throughout the year with the students. But that's going to bring us to being curriculum ready, right? So there's different types of curriculum that we have to deal with. If we're pushing into the content areas, we need to know some of that content curriculum. If you do pull out ELD, perhaps your school has bought a curriculum that you work through or created their own. And you could be in that third spot there with curriculum. What's that? Because a lot of schools just don't have any curriculum for their ELD classes. So then just think units and lessons, right? These are the things that we're making up for different themes throughout the year. But we got to start looking through that now, reorganizing it, and deciding what we want to add to it, right? Because you want to feel when you're going back in late August or September, you want to feel ready, you want to feel prepared and confident and not being making the stuff up on the spot. So it does make a difference what type of curriculum you're working with, right? If it's multi-grade levels that you're pushing into versus if you just do pull out ELD, you're going to be looking at it different ways, but a lot of this is going to overlap. You want to have some language objectives kind of in your pocket. So when Tyler was talking about knowing those key language functions and where they're used across all content areas, you want to be able to attack them on the word, sentence, and discourse level. And if you have that, you can use argue in math or science or social studies or ELA. You can use the same function across all of them and just start adapting it for what you need at that time. I also want to point out here, but throughout a lot of what we're doing, start thinking about the goal that you have to have for the year, right? Your SMART goal, because you might want to do something in this realm where you're really building out your curriculum and your expertise in an area and your resources in an area that's going to benefit you, but you can also make that into a SMART goal here. So as our responsibilities we talked about earlier, right? We're responsible for that really systematic and explicit teaching of English, no matter what role we are in. We also need to support, actually have a, I don't know why I chose that word. I don't like that one as much, but we have to support the classroom teachers, right? They too, like Tyler said, at least in Massachusetts, they have to be SEI endorsed, and they need to know everywhere. They need to know how to work with their ESL students. But I'm going to bet if it's like here, most places, there's not enough training for classroom teachers and how to really, really work through language. So as ESL teachers, you are the language expert. And by showing them different things they can do and supporting their learning in that too, that's really going to help. And then advocating for our students, right? Advocating both with the classroom teacher, with the administrators, and making sure that they're getting what they need and that you're getting what you need in order to do your job. And remember, if there's a little pushback on you teaching language in a content area classroom, that academic language is no one's first language. Kids aren't going home and talking about Pythagorean theorem around the dinner table. Most aren't, right? So all the kids need practice in that type of language, but we're adding more to it that we know that our students need as well. So as you think about language and the importance of language, I want to look both at the WIDA resource, which is always our go-to, but then ChatGPT, because ChatGPT can be your friend as you're doing this, right? And of course, Common Core, we'll look a little bit at that as well. ChatGPT, I'll probably say this a few times, it can be your friend, but you have to be really careful. You have to know that you are the expert. You must check everything that it gives to you, and be sure that you read through it all, because it makes mistakes and you have to be ready for it. So let's look at an example. If you are working a second, third grade level at the beginning of the year, like Tyler said, something that's really common is talking about what they did over the summer, right? So in this example, I chose the key use of narrate. And there's 4 key uses, right? Narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And argue and explain across the 4 content areas, those get the most play. So those are really key ones to dig into as you're doing this type of work. But no matter what the curriculum says, as ESL teachers, we're always coming back to WIDA. So in this grade level, it is showing you the expressive and interpretive language that's needed. And then it also shows you the features. If you decide to take this and look at it with the content area, whether you're pushing in or not, in order to get the biggest bang for your buck, we want our students to see an overlap of the language that we're teaching and the content that they're using as meaningful practice for it. So here for third grade, for the Common Core standards, on the left-hand side, it lists the different breakdowns of that standard for narrate in third grade, which is establish a situation, use of description of adjectives, thoughts, and feelings, right? Figurative language, temporal words, sense of closure. And if you look at what I pulled out from the WIDA, narrate, ELA, grade span 2, 3, what we need to do there as language teachers, it's almost the same thing, right? You have your opening statements, describe what characters do, think, and feel, connectors and sequence to sequence time. You're always going to see in WIDA, it says first, next, and then. And like Tyler said, if it's not the beginning of the year or it's not newcomers, move on. from first, next, and then. Really, we want them to get a good academic or better academic language, and we'll look for some examples in a minute of that. So if you're thinking of what am I doing at the beginning of the year? Okay, my students are going to be using some narration. They're going to tell a story about what they did over the summer. Then choose one of these language pieces. Do you want to work on adjectives? Do you want to work on descriptors? Do you want to work on how they can open a story and make it interesting? But choosing that language with the meaningful content of what they did over the summer with the overlap of a content area need is going to make a large impact on them. Now, here's where AI can be helpful. So this, I took the example too of talking about summer vacation, right? Because so many people do that, but you can do it with whatever. But if I know that my topic is summer stories, and I'm thinking I want to work on opening statement, I went into, in this case, ChatGPT. And if you don't use it yet, the next slide will show you, or 2 slides, and I'll show you a link on how you can do this. But I said, you know, these are my students, 2nd, 3rd grade, beginning of year, explained what I was doing. I want to do narrate. And I asked it to give me some vocabulary words. It gave me a whole list. I think I asked for 20. And a lot of them just weren't appropriate for 2nd or 3rd grade, or I didn't think they would fit. So I narrowed down to what I wanted. Then I asked, please give me sentence starters that I could use with this grade level as well. It gave me the list. I chose what I wanted. Then I asked, please use these sentence starters in a sentence using the vocabulary that you gave me previously. And it creates these sentences for us. So you have, within about 3 minutes, a list of some vocabulary, some sentence starters, and some examples for your students. Now, you could do this with anything. With the language functions we were talking about earlier, you do the same thing. Give me 2nd, 3rd grade level language for argue. What could I use? What are some sentence stems? I also asked this actually with the extension I put on. Please create a picture for each sentence that you listed here. And AI will create you a picture that describes exactly an adventure where I learned to swim in a local pool. And you have a picture of kids swimming in a local pool. And there's so much more you can do with that, right? Hang it up around the classroom, have kids list adjectives, list nouns, put them into other sentences, create another story. So AI in this case can be your friend. You can also ask it what grammar might be needed for this function that I'm asking you to do. And in this case, among other things, it told me the sentence structure, different tenses, the transitions, again, sequence, it gave me first, next, then, and last. Please move beyond. And then adjectives, right? So adjectives, well, why not talk about placement of adjectives, right? Before or after the noun, depending on what country our kids are coming from, it's a bit different. Or the order of them, or a lexical array of them. What could it look like? What visuals could you make for that? So there's so much more that can be done with AI, can be done really quickly and make things, it's like you're brainstorming, right? It just takes less time. It's in your brain anyway, but let's organize it and get it out fast and decide what you want to do. So a word of caution though, it also told me that I could teach the subjunctive case, even though I told them it was the 2nd and 3rd grade, beginning of the year. So again, make sure you read through. It does not know what is best. But here's just a quick, this is how you do it if you haven't been into ChatGPT. The link is here. So you can try that. And you just put in, you make a prompt, you put in a bit of background of who you are and who you're working with. And then you just start asking it some prompts. You tell it what to do. And there's a whole another sessions on that we do, but it's a great start. And I put it in here because if it's something that you want to use to save time when the school year starts, now's the time to start playing with it so that it's not taking up more time as you try to learn and get frustrated with it when you're coming home tired and correcting papers and all of that stuff. So, and I know we have different subject teachers on here too, right? This works for anything. Go in, have some fun with it, and play around. So our question to you is, do you believe you could implement this by the end of the summer? So do you think that with these different things that you're thinking about now, is it possible that before you go back to school, you could have a plan in place and have executed some of it? Tyler, I'm going to let you take the next one.
Sure. So if the answer to that question for you was, yes, I think I could do this, but I need a little bit more support. If you are someone who needs that accountability for the follow through, if you are someone who works really well in community, or you're feeling like, okay, I have an idea of what I want to do with these things that we just covered, but I think I need a little bit of guidance as to what exactly, right? Then maybe this would be for you. We are offering a 3-day challenge next week, the 14th, 15th, and 16th, 7 to 8. And we are going to be diving in deeper to all of the topics that we covered. So each day we'll dive into the topics that we covered, the 3 main topics, one on each day. And it's really going to be an opportunity to support you in getting this work done. So by the end of the time together, you'll actually have some of the work prepared and not have to do it independently when you get back to school or now.
And I think for things like what was the first part we did? I just lost it. The key routines. I was going to say functions. Yeah, for the key routines, like, okay, so let's decide on, we give lists and lists, right? Let's decide on which ones are the priority. And let's talk together about how that should look in the classroom. And what are your pre-assessments going to be like? Let's spend a day on some of that part and talk about how can you do that easily? What questions do you ask that are going to capture the beginner, intermediate, and advanced proficiency levels? So by the end of each day, we would have takeaways. You'd have homework too, but we'd have takeaways for each one of those. So with some of the teachers we've worked with in the past, some of their testimonials are things like, you instilled a confidence in my ability I never had before. A teacher I coached this year, it was her first year in middle school, and she said, if I didn't have you this year, I would have quit. We loved having your guidance, and your well-rounded expertise has shaped the way that I run my classroom for English language learners. So as I said, we do coaching, we do one-on-one coaching with teachers, we do PD and coaching in school districts as well. But we really like to be in small group with teachers and supporting them, which is why we want to help get teachers ready to go back to school and experience some of that joy in back to school and not just the stress. So for the 3-day challenge for you, we had said we have something at the end. If you decide that you would like to do that with a group of other educators and with us with some guidance, so you're prepared to go back and we'll hold you accountable for it. If you put in the ESL Challenge 50 code, that's going to give you half off, since you guys were nice enough to come and join us for this webinar. And we also have a ESL Ready Set Plan checklist. We're going to email both of these things out to you. So if you can't scan or don't have the capability now, we'll email these to you along with the video of tonight. But the checklist is just going to give you even more areas than we talked about here of things to think about for getting ready for the new year. Gives you some space for you to write down your own ideas as well.
And I just added the PDF to the chat also. So you can either access it there or it will be attached to the follow-up emails.
Thanks, Tyler. So to end, we just wanted to open up some time for questions or any thoughts you have. I know you're all educators as well. So if there's things that you do at the beginning of the year that you want to share with us and with others, we'd love to hear that. Our information is up there if you want to talk to us later or have questions for us, but we'll open it up either for chat or for coming off mute. Melinda.
Hi, quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Quick question about at the beginning of the top of the hour, you had put in a link that I didn't get to because I was on my phone, so I moved over to my computer.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering,
the candy,
yeah, if you could
right?
repost it,
Yes, I can do that again.
that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
There you go.
Are there any other questions we can answer or pieces that you want to share with each other? It's all about collaboration. All right, Melinda.
Yeah, just one more thing. I'm mostly, you did kind of focus a lot on the elementary school level, and I'm high school. So I'm going to have a lot of very, older kids. I even had this past year, I had 2 kids who were 19 who were just coming in and just learning English. So like you said, establishing routines and trying to figure out the whole, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate in the classroom, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, that sort of thing. Do you have anything that you would say is probably more along the lines of high school? I mean, I feel like a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about were more directed towards elementary, and I feel like that might be more of your experiences with that. But on your 3-day thing, is that going to be more geared towards elementary than high school?
So a lot of the strategies and planning that we're going to talk about is really going to be for whatever grade level is appropriate, because we want it to be you making it your own. I know we do have another high school teacher that is planning on joining for the challenge, and she does work with she has multiple levels, but we will talk about what kinds of routines are appropriate for older learners. What types of social language might you need to support in a high school classroom that might be a little bit different than elementary school classroom. So the examples that we may have mentioned are probably more geared towards elementary, but that doesn't mean that all of those suggestions and routines and strategies that we might talk about couldn't also be very important for middle and high school level students as well.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Well, thank you so much
Thanks,
for joining
Melinda.
us.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great night. Stop recording.